I was at a seminar the other day and I saw the school's flyer, and I'm always curious about how somebody puts their description of what their martial arts is about, or their credentials or their background. So I take my time and I kind of read, okay, this is the instructor, this is credentials, well-established instructors. Great, let's look at the classes. Okay, they got some of this, some of this, some of this. They got a mixture of different classes. Great. And then you see the description. Okay, what's the description? One of them was the description of BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And words pop out that I've seen iconically in several flyers. So it says 90% of fights end up on the ground. Okay. You could interpret that as, are we talking about 90% of street fights end up on the ground? 90% of jiu-jitsu fights end up on the ground, judo fights end up on the ground, karate, kickboxing, whatever. And it's pretty explanatory that it's talking specifically about self-defense, street defense. So we got to go back and we got to define, for those who don't know, what is street self-defense? Well, it's defending yourself against a street fight. So now let's look at what is a street fight. I grew up in Los Angeles for 35 years, spent a lot of time in Texas, lived in the Middle East for 3 years, been to every 50 states, been the last 13 years in Denver, been in New York, New Jersey, slept on the street, been in street fights, been in mall fights, and I don't see the consistency at 90%. First of all, I like people, if they do put percentages down, let's explain the details. What do they mean by 90%? And it's very similar to the nutrition people. They'll say 90% of your success is based on nutrition. Okay, well, tell me how that's broken down. Tell me 90%, how was that figured out? Because I have the same issue on that part. For some people, it might be 100%. For some people, it might be 10%. Are we saying averages, or what are we saying? So the street fights that I've personally seen eye to eye and on videos, by far the mass majority of them have started standing up and ended standing up. Somebody runs away, somebody gets their skull broken in by a fist or a pipe, or somebody gets stabbed. They might die on the ground, they might go unconscious on the ground, but the fight's not happening on the ground. Also, look at what a street fight is. A street fight, there are no rules. And if you look at the mass majority of street fights across the world, by far a large percentage of them, there's some type of weapon, improvised weapon, or real weapon involved. And it can go all the way from a pen, a writing utensil, a stick, a broken chair, a broken table, a pipe, a plunger, a knife, a dagger, a stick, a sword, a gun. The list goes on and on. A broomstick, okay? A barrel, you get a rock, you throw it on somebody. Those are what you see worldwide in these street fights, because a lot of times they're being fought by people that may be defending themselves, may be involved in some type of mugging, robbery, against the cops, whatever. I mean, the plethora of styles and reasons goes on more than we have time for in this situation. So just all you got to do is look at YouTube, look at surveillance cameras, look at that, and look at 100 videos. And out of 100 videos, and we're talking about street fights, we're not talking about tournaments, we're not talking about rearrange, we're not talking about, hey, this buddy told his buddy to fight. And you're gonna look at everything from a kid fighting all the way to an adult fighting, and see how many of them utilize their terrain or utilize their weapon and what have you. First of all, in street fights, we're talking about if it's in the street, if it's in the mud, if it's in the gravel, if it's in the asphalt, if it's in the cement, if it's in the water, the ice, or whatever, are you going to want to spend a lot of time rolling on the ground? So anyway, my question is, I've never ever seen, I see a lot of statistics, I've never seen an actual legitimate street fight breakdown that says 90% of these fights that were looked at are ground related. In other words, the fight's on the ground. So nothing to put down any martial art. I think every martial art has benefit. I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I love Taekwondo. I love Tai Chi. I love kickboxing. I love Muay Thai, Savate. The list goes on and on. And I participated in, definitely about a dozen of these major arts that we see. And everything's a variation of another art when you break it down into it. But you do have arts that are specific more to the ground, more to the stand-up, more to the takedown. And you have to absolutely incorporate all those. And the more you incorporate and engage in sports, activities, and self-defense that's in the ground, standing up, takedown related, full contact, point fighting, it's just going to make you a well-rounded fighter in the street. And then, of course, if you're looking at, just look at all the weapons that are engaged in street fights. And it makes sense. If you really want to learn street fights, you have to engage in knowing how to utilize a weapon, short, long, extended. So my point is that if you're a martial artist out there, and your flyers say 90% of street fights end up on the ground, or 90% of fights end up on the ground, I argue the only accurate part would be you could say 90% of jiu-jitsu and judo fights end up on the ground. But if you're talking about street fights, you're lying to your public and you're giving them a false study, unless you find a study that's different than what I'm seeing. Because from my personal experience from seeing fights, from other people's video cameras and surveillance cameras, I'd never see 90% of fights. Now, if you saw 2 fights and both of them were on the ground and that's all you ever saw, then you might say 100% of the fights. But I'm talking about large scale studies and statistics worldwide. You're not going to find anything near close to 70%, 80%, 90%, the stuff that people put on the ground fight. So absolutely go out there, learn jiu-jitsu, learn Shudo, learn shoot fighting, shoot wrestling, learn Aikido, learn Sambo, learn all of these great arts. Integrate some type of full contact arts. You know what it feels like to take a hit and to fight while getting hit. Your boxing, your kickboxing, savate, Muay Thai. You've got to learn something in that category. You've got to learn some type of traditional art that kind of blends some styles and ranges together, which is your karate, your kung fu, your sambos, things like that. So the more you learn, the better. You've got to learn some weapons, whether it's Filipino stick and knife fighting, whether it's Apache battle tactics, or whether it's kendo, kinjutsu, whatever. Learn how to use that. Fencing's a great one because it works on footwork. Remember, weapons aren't just teaching you to, hey, I got to walk around with the sword. They're teaching you about distance, range, and footwork, and that's going to be key to fighting. And then the last thing I want to bring up is street fights. If you look at 100 videos, look how many of those videos are one person on one person. There's also a lot that are 2 people on one person, 3 people. Or if it is one person, there's 5 people behind them. So if the fight goes sour with this guy and this guy's losing, the 4 people kind of pair up. And if you're talking about home invasions, if you're talking about rapes, mugs, major violence, crimes, people killing each other, typically you're going to see more often than not more than one person. So if you're saying that one art is going to make you successful, especially when it's on the ground against a street fight, meaning street fight's more than 2 people, it's going to go out the window even more. So you get 2 people fighting one person that wants to fight on the ground. These 2 people are going to be pretty successful, mass majority of the time. You get 3 people, 4 people, because you can only engage so far in the ground when you have more than one person. One-on-one's great for tournaments. It's great for the application of, one person's trying to attack you, but you got to say, okay, what can I add to my arts and my styles that can help me fight 2, 3, 4, 5, a whole army of people? And then you got to take in the scenario of, if I'm always training barefoot, can I train with my feet on? Savate, you're always training with shoes on. It makes sense to do some training with your gear on. If you're a military, you've got to put all your gear on and see how well different ranges are working for you. And then how easy it is with heavy gear on to get tackled. How quickly can I get back up? And again, do I want to stay on the ground very long if there's 2, 3, 4 people? So just keep that in mind as you continue your training and your journey. Understand anytime you say the word street defense or self-defense, you're talking about typically 2 or more people, and the majority of the time some type of weapon or improvised. It could be a chair as a weapon. I see that all the time. Just grabbing what's nearest around you. So when you're saying my art's the best for this, there's no best martial art and there's no best range. You've got to learn it all. It's all equally important, but one doesn't take care of all the situations. If you're only thinking one-dimensional on one range, you're wrong, and you're not going to be successful the majority of the time in street fights.